Welcome to the Campus Stress Reduction Project. My name is Don Lopez and I'm the Vice President of Instruction here at Fresno City College. This project was a collaborative between the Psychological Services Department and our faculty in the Human Services area. The project was developed as a way to help diffuse some of the anxiety and stress that our faculty and staff may feel upon their return to the campus. At this time, I'd like to introduce Sherilyn Krill-Hornsby, the Dean of Social Sciences, who is the coordinator for this project. Sherilyn.
Hello. So, why a campus stress reduction project? As I'm sure you're aware, our students, faculty, staff, and administrators have undergone a significant amount of stress in the past months. And as a result of that, we wanted to ensure that you had available tools, skills, and discussion opportunities to support your ability to address these items when they occur in your daily working environment. The Campus Stress Reduction Series for Fall 2021 is planned in 3 parts. Part 1 is this frontline training support video. This video presentation is paired with 2 faculty-hosted workshop sessions. These are designed to help you understand, identify, and deal with common stress situations that can impact your work and student learning. This training helps to develop focused empathy, supports clear role boundaries, and provides tools to help activate students to be empowered in their own support systems. Next, proactive self-care sessions will help project leads, administrators, and managers support team environments with self-care processes to help diffuse stress reactions and support positive working environments in challenging times. Finally, monthly campus-wide stress reduction sessions will be open to everyone, students, faculty, staff, and administrators. These sessions will be led by Masters of Social Work and Psychological Services interns. The compact sessions will provide direct activities and skills to help reduce stress and support self-awareness with stress recovery techniques. Workshops will be held monthly from August through November with topics and session information distributed in advance. Welcome to the Frontline Training Support video. This material was developed by Professor Renee Clift and Dr. Natasha Bivioff of the Social Sciences Human Services Department, along with Dr. Samuel Montano, the Psychological Services Coordinator for the State Center Community College District. This team created the following presentation and associated hosted workshops to help our transition back to campus. We believe the tools and skills described will support a healthy campus community.
Hey everyone, my name is Natasha Bibioff and I am a Human Services instructor. I also co-facilitate the MSW intern program at Fresno City College. In this part of the presentation, I'm going to talk to you about understanding stress. So when we look at what is stress, stress can be defined as the physiological or psychological response to internal or external stressors. So sometimes things might be going on inside our bodies like disease or anxiety that impact us or are stressful to us. External stressors can be anything on the outside of us. And it's important for us to understand stress because stress impacts almost every system in our body. It has such a great influence on us. And it can influence how we think about things, how we feel, and ultimately how we behave in our environments. So we always need to be aware of stress and stressors that are happening. When we look at stress a little bit closer, not all stress is negative or bad. Positive stressors in our life help us get things done. It helps us study for that exam coming up. It helps us submit a report, meet a deadline, helps us throw a surprise party for our spouses. We are wired to respond to stress. So some stress is good. The problem becomes when stress is over that optimal line, as you can see in the middle here of this chart. Once we pass that optimal level, we start to feel things like fatigued, exhausted, anxiety, panic, and ultimately can lead to burnout. And so we want to make sure that we're monitoring our stress so that we're not always past that optimal level. Because once that happens, we are not accomplishing anything and we are really harming ourselves and potentially other people. So some stress is good to help us get things done, but too much stress pushes us over that curve and all the way down to the slope. So how stressed are we? You probably know how stressed you are, but the American Psychological Association conducted a survey in 2020 and published its results in January 2021. So these are some of the things that people in the survey were concerned about, and overall a representative sample of our nation or country. So things like the future of our nation, coronavirus, political unrest, political climate, and the breach of the Capitol. Ultimately, the majority of people within the survey were concerned, had high stress levels around these incidents. Other things we might be stressed about: the economy, disrupted routines. This last year and a half, we've had to establish new routines, and any change causes some great stress. We had to manage distance learning for our children or ourselves. We also had to all of a sudden have our classes all online. We had to manage our curriculum. All of these things were very stressful, and this survey results posted that confirms that, right? Confirms what you know, what you've been stressed about this last year and a half. Also, generally the impact of the pandemic, if people we know or yourself have been getting sick, that is stressful as well. So all these things have been really stressful in the last, again, year and a half. When we look at the impact of stress, we want to also look at it with an equity lens, because we know from research that stress doesn't impact everybody in the same sort of way. So we want to be conscious of that when we're looking at our students that are stressed and ourselves as well as stressed, so that we understand that, again, not everybody experiences stress in the same sort of way, even with the same incident, even with the same situation. So three types of stress, mainly three types of stress that I'm going to talk about here is acute, chronic, and traumatic. Acute is that short-term sort of stress. It doesn't always have to be, again, negative. It can be something positive. Examples like you're taking a test, or you're meeting with a supervisor unexpectedly, or ultimately the death of a loved one, which is, of course, not positive. However, that acute, it comes on suddenly and quickly, and if you address it, the stress can dissipate or go away. Okay, so acute is something that happens, and then the stress from the incident is resolved. Again, it usually stems from one event or incident that occurs. Chronic stress is longer term, and it's consistent and persistent ongoing stress. So the stressors daily kind of add up. You have a lot of stuff on your plate. There's a lot of different sort of stressors that are coming in. Examples are if you're arguing with your spouse on an almost daily basis, or at work if you're having a lot of disagreements, or you're feeling that there is, if your neighborhood is unsafe as well. So these are all stressors that can impact your ongoing stress. So chronic can be also this pandemic, right? The pandemic started as acute stress. This sudden incident was announced. We had no idea what was going on. It was very acute. We had high stress. And it wasn't resolved very quickly because the stress continued. So we had to change a lot about our lives. There was different things that we were impacted by the pandemic. So that stress became chronic for us. So in the last year, we've been likely experiencing a lot of chronic stress due to these incidences or these situations that have been happening. And then lastly, traumatic stress. So traumatic stress it can come from an injury, abuse, or other sort of psychological shock. It's very serious in your response. It can occur just from one incident, a serious incident, or it can occur over many. So if you are living in a household or your students are living in a household with domestic violence that's ongoing or weekly, traumatic stress can be a result of those situations. So we want to be aware of all three of these, but especially chronic stress, because chronic stress, you're in a state of stress just kind of all the time. Acute stress and traumatic stress, you know that something happened, you have a physiological response or a psychological response, and you're able to notice it a little bit more. Chronic stress is, well, I kind of am just always stressed. So it's hard to sort of gauge where you're at on your stress levels. So we really want to be aware of especially the chronic stress, and with our students as well, that it sometimes can be challenging to recognize the chronic stress within us because we're just sort of at a baseline. Our baseline of stress has changed. So something to be aware of. So symptoms of stress, of all three stress, have symptoms, both physical and emotional symptoms. So physical, you might experience things like low energy. You might start to get headaches more frequently, aches and pains that are not explained by other situations. You might start getting frequent colds or getting sick more often. So we have that physiological responses to stress. And so these are things that we can be aware of. Also, that we can be aware of our students as well. If they are we can help our students understand that in themselves. And then emotional, if you're finding yourself with general sort of unhappiness or depression, you're feeling overwhelmed, you're feeling loneliness or isolation, the pandemic really impacted a lot of us with loneliness and isolation because we were put into those situations because we had to isolate from other people. So emotional can be a response to stress as well. So as professionals, as faculty, as other professionals on campus, in the community, we want to make sure that we keep an eye out for things that we are experiencing. These are sort of clues that we need to address the stress in our own lives. It's also clues that students are experiencing high stress and need to address it in their lives as well. Later in the presentation, Professor Clift and Dr. Montano are going to talk about ways that you can interact with students who are having a lot of stress, and also speak to what you can do if you are recognizing these in yourself. So one of the things is procrastination. You might notice that you are grading papers a lot less than you usually do. You're procrastinating on simple tasks that didn't cause you much grief or problems in the past. Your students might start submitting assignments late. These are all sort of things that can occur if people are overwhelmed with stress. You might find yourself being agitated, you're arguing with others, your significant others, or those around you. Students in your classes might be combative about boundaries or things that are occurring within your class unreasonably. Okay, so again, students might express agitation and be due to stress in their own lives. Other things like inability to rest or relax, that's often a symptom of high stress, is when you can't just unwind. Like even if you don't have anything to do that day and you just took the day off to relax, you finding it hard to really sort of unwind and fully relax. You're not getting potentially a good night's sleep. So all of these things, again, are impacted by stress. Your difficulty focusing, not able to accomplish simple tasks. You might start to have attendance issues, and students as well. Maybe students were attending your class and then all of a sudden they just dropped off. If you are having trouble facing the sort of task of the day, and so you avoid work, or your students start to avoid assignments, etc., this can be a sign that there is stress in their lives that need to be addressed. So lastly, a few things to keep in mind as you work through this presentation material and others that we will put out throughout the semester. Keep in mind that you are not a machine. I tell myself this and I tell my students this all the time, is that your best is going to vary from day to day. So we are always trying to do our best, but again, it might look differently depending on what day of the week and what's happening in that week. We've been in very stressful situations, again, this last year and a half, especially. And so we really want to give ourselves some grace in allowing and understanding that our best can change. And then lastly, keep in mind that our presentation and this overall sort of tips and becoming aware of stress is just the tip of the iceberg. So there's always more underneath to explore, and it's our hope that you're able to, this serves as a springboard for your curiosity about stress and how you can address it, both again for your students and for yourself as well. And that concludes my presentation of understanding stress. If you have any questions for me in particular, please feel free to email me at any time. Take care.
Greetings. My name is Renee Clift, and I'm an instructor in social work or human services at Fresno City College. I'm also a licensed clinical social worker. And I've been asked to talk to you today about one source of stress that you may encounter, and that is when a student comes to you to have a conversation about some issue or concern that the student has that's outside of his or her direct academic performance. It may be that the student has concerns with housing insecurity or food insecurity or relationship challenges, or even having endured some kind of a trauma or a serious loss. It's often that students develop trusting relationships with us, and they want to have conversations with us to help maybe figure out how to go forward with these issues in life. And it's important for us at this time to remember our role. We are instructors of our students. We have a responsibility to support them in their academic success. And while that oftentimes includes helping them to address issues in their personal lives that may be impairing their capacity for academic success, we have to remember that there are boundaries. There are boundaries on what's appropriate behavior for us to perform, and also boundaries with regard to what we're actually capable of doing. So I'm going to talk with you today about what we need to do in order to make those conversations that we might have with students profitable ones for both ourselves and the student, and of course the relationship we have with our students. So as I said, first and foremost, remember your role. Your role is to support the student's academic success in your course. You have limited capacity and responsibility to help them address any problems that they might be having outside of their academic functioning. Always keep this in mind during the conversation and any interaction with your students. And I think that it can create some good kind of boundaries for how we move forward in the conversation. Okay, let's move forward here. Okay, so here are some very important things to keep in mind when having these conversations. The first is the power imbalance between yourself and the student. Recognize that because you have more power in this relationship, you have more influence. And even though you might not intend, the student may take what you say with some serious weight, and may feel compelled to either accept or follow your views, or do what you suggest that the student do in order to address whatever his or her problem is. So we need to be very careful about that power imbalance and make sure that we're not using it in a way that is detrimental to the student's well-functioning. One of the things you want to be doing during the conversation is making sure that you're giving back, you're acknowledging the student's power in addressing whatever his or her need is, and that you are consciously giving power back to the student, even though he or she might be relying on you to exert some inappropriate influence. So keep the power and balance in mind and make sure that you're yielding that power and balance toward the student. It's very important to respect and maintain the privacy, not only the privacy of the student, but also your privacy. It's so important to not ask questions that you have no business knowing, and to encourage that boundaries are set in the conversation with regard to appropriate privacy. This includes that when the students start sharing things with you that you really don't have any need to or business knowing, that you very respectfully stop that, and that you say something to the effect of, I really appreciate that you want to share this with me, but this is not my information to know about your personal life. And what I want to do is to help you get connected to somebody who's appropriate for you to share this information with, and who can help you based upon the information that you want to share with me. So that's kind of a respectful way to make sure that you're setting the boundaries around privacy. And once again, make sure that you're very careful with the questions you ask. Also very important to be non-judgmental. Now, this goes back to that power imbalance that we have. The student may look to us for some kind of not only direction, but also determination about whether he or she is doing the right thing. That is not your determination to make. The student has brought this concern to you, and what you need to do is to simply listen with open, non-judgmental, accepting ears, and be a support person for the student. So non-judgment is very important. Remember that so often judgment can come across not only in the words we say, but also our nonverbal behaviors. So what you do with the expression on your face, what you do with your eyes, your tone of voice, all of that can indicate judgment. So be very careful about that. Also, very, very important is to limit, if not eliminate, any self-disclosure. This goes back to the maintenance of appropriate boundaries, respect for your privacy. The student has no need to and no business knowing about your life. And, this even links to what I say next about advice giving. I have real issues, and students in my classes know that advice giving is something that is absolutely forbidden in my work and my instruction to them. Giving somebody advice essentially is saying, well, this is what I did in my life and it worked great for me, so I'm sure it'll work great for you. How dare we assume that? And even though the story that the student is telling you, the student's situation may seem very, very similar to something you've encountered, I promise you that there are nuances of difference that are tremendously impactful. And furthermore, it is in no way empowering for the student for you or somebody else to attempt to solve the student's problem by laying your solution on his or her problem. So limit self-disclosure, limit what you talk about with regard to your experience. Not to say that that isn't helpful. That can be a tool that we use that can help to kind of enhance the trust in the relationship, but it needs to be very limited. And then once again, no advice giving. The student needs to figure out for him or herself what his or her best advice and direction forward is. And your role is to support the student in discovering what that is. Problem resolution requires increased agency and empowerment. So once again, this links from what I'm talking about. And the increased agency and empowerment is on the part of the student, on the part of the person, the expert who's experiencing the problem or the challenge. So once again, what we want to do is to try to support the student addressing and solving his or her own issues in the manner that takes advantage of the student's capacities and is applicable to what's going on in the student's life. It's very beneficial for a person to use his or her own resources for problem resolution. In social work, we call this, this is one component of what we call the strengths perspective. And this is so important because not only are my own resources immediately accessible to me, I don't have to go out and acquire some resource, I don't have to learn some new skill. Those resources, those tools, those capacities are also the ones that are most likely to fit for my ability to engage quickly in addressing my problem, and they're also most likely to appropriately fit for whatever my need is, whatever my challenge is. So one of the things we want to try to do when we're talking with students about how to address their needs is to ask them questions such as, have you experienced a situation similar to this in the past? And if so, how did you deal with that? Are there people in your personal life who have been supportive of you in the past, who you can rely on for direction, maybe advice, but for direction and support? Are there resources within your family or within your community? Are there support people? Are there organizations? Are there resource providers, tool providers that you might be able to turn to in order to help you address this problem? So we want to make sure we take advantage of the capacities the student already has. Granted, there may not be, and that may be why the student is stymied in terms of dealing with this problem. And if that's the case, I'm going to talk about, and we are going to talk further about what you do in that situation. Okay, let's go forward here. So very important to determine in the beginning of the conversation what the student's motivation is. You know, students come and initiate conversations with us for all kinds of reasons. And even though it may seem in the conversation that the student is looking for some support and maybe even direction about how to handle a situation in his or her life, once again, we want to try to limit that to his or her academic functioning. The student may simply use the presentation of that problem as a way to engage us, as a way to interest us in talking with him or her. So, you know, I think it's really important to just point blank ask the question, why are you telling me this? What is it that you want me to do in order to help you? So I sat down and I kind of brainstormed from my 31 years of teaching at Fresno City College what I think some potential reasons are for students having these conversations with us. Other than the upfront conversation of, I need your help, okay? So here are just 6 ideas that I thought of. One is to possibly explain some poor academic performance. Maybe the student's grades and performance on completing assignments or even attendance in the class has fallen off. And the student wants to explain to you why, what's going on. And that's great. That's wonderful that the student has that trust in you. Sometimes we engage in conversations with students like this, ask them what's going on, why there's been a change in their academic functioning, because we want to know what we can do to help. So if that's the case, once again, what you need to focus on is the student's academic performance and kind of compartmentalize the personal challenges the student is having that are affecting his or her academic performance. And how do you compartmentalize them? What do I mean by that? Well, I mean that you address the academic performance and then you do what you can to try to get the student connected to somebody else who can help him or her address the issues in his or her life. Another reason a student may come to us and engage in a conversation is to be granted some kind of accommodation. My mother died. I wasn't able to complete that assignment. Can I have an extra 2 weeks? I'm really stressed out because I'm worried about this medical issue that my daughter has. I think I'm going to need to drop the course even though it's after the drop deadline. So things like this, sometimes the students, they don't know what to do when they've gotten in this rut and they realize that some situation in their personal life is impairing their academic performance. So they come to us kind of asking us, how can I repair this and get back on track? Or how can I deal with whatever my issue is, perhaps drop the class and then re-enroll it at a more advantageous time. So think about that. And, you know, as I said, sometimes we want to ask students specifically if these are some of the issues or intentions that they may have about the outcome of the conversation or their reason for engaging us. Another reason is just because the student likes you and trusts you, and maybe sees you as a role model. The student may have a desire to build a relationship with you, and that's really wonderful. Just make sure you maintain the boundaries on those appropriate boundaries on those relationships. You know, I firmly believe that a trusting relationship is essential in order to have a learner-teacher, an effective learner-teacher relationship. In fact, one of the things I always talk about is how that relationship is reciprocal, that I learn as much from my students as I want them to learn from me. And we need to make sure that we're conveying that to our students, that they have a very important capacity to teach their peers as well as us. So building relationship is important, and you want to make sure that you respect that desire that the student has. You know, the other thing there I found is that oftentimes there's a need to kind of put some time boundaries on that, because you can have a student stop you after class or want to talk to you during an office hour, and he or she doesn't want to stop after many, many minutes. So, and you know, it's important to think up a legitimate reason if you need to close that conversation down. Don't tell some kind of a falsehood like, I've got a dentist appointment, I really need to go. Okay, I'm sorry. Another reason why students oftentimes are motivated to talk to us is to talk out a situation with a trusted person. You know, a lot of times in life, we realize we have a challenge, we have a need, and somewhere in our minds, maybe up front, maybe deep, deep in our subconscious, we know what we need to do. We know what we want to do about this problem, but we have a desire to kind of wash it out, to think about and to verbalize. Verbalization oftentimes helps us with our cognitive processes. And even though I've sat and I've thought with myself about this problem, sometimes it can be so helpful just to talk about it. And once again, maybe the student sees you as a role model and trusts you and wants to simply talk about a situation with you, isn't looking for you to help him or her solve it, except to give support. Another reason why a student might engage in a conversation with you is to because of a need to vent or mourn a loss. Students go through all kinds of, it's amazing to me how many different kinds of losses students encounter as they are taking our courses. And that, you know, all the way from a death, even a traumatic death, to, you know, I had a fight with my partner last night, and I'm not sure how our relationship is going to go forward. And I'm really focused on this, and I'm having a hard time focusing on studying for my test. So once again, not necessarily a problem the student wants your assistance in solving, but just wants to talk about it. It is absolutely appropriate for you to give him or her some time and support, but remember your responsibilities, your boundaries. And then the last reason I thought of when I brainstormed about why students oftentimes start these conversations is to access a needed opportunity or resource or relationship in order to address the problem. Sometimes students don't know what to do or where to go. And part of what you can do during these conversations is to use your knowledge to try to direct or refer the student to somebody who can help. Now, I want to be very clear. There is not the expectation that you have knowledge or commit to memory a resource directory that students might be able to use in terms of addressing problems in their lives. It's good if you are knowledgeable of the resources on campus and can refer students to the student supportive resources on campus, and then allow those professionals to understand what's going on with the student and refer the student elsewhere. So don't feel compelled, please. Don't feel overwhelmed. Once again, this is outside of your scope of practice. But as I said, it would be really beneficial for you to have some idea when a student comes to you with a need, have some idea of what an on-campus resource is that you could help the student get connected to in order to move forward in resolving his or her problem. And we're going to talk more about what some of those resources are further on in the training. And I hope that having knowledge of those resources can help to reduce the stress that you might experience during these conversations. So as you listen to the student, focus your attention to detect the student's motivation, and then ask the student in order to clarify. I mean, just ask, are you wanting to have this conversation with me because you're concerned about your academic performance lately? Are you wanting to have this conversation with me simply because you want to share yourself or your life with me? I appreciate that, okay? So don't hesitate to ask a direct question about that. Okay, so tips for a successful conversation. Once again, said it before. Keep the conversation focused and brief. One of the reasons this is really important, especially if the student is truly seeking help for some kind of a challenge, is that human beings, when we have a need and we seek help from somebody else to address that need, that's stressful. And there's the experience of risk involved with that. It's the risk of opening myself up to somebody. It's the risk and the stress of conceptualizing what my need is, what my challenge is, and being able to tell it to somebody in a manner that is comprehensible by that person, that makes sense by that person, that even engages that person to care about what I'm dealing with. There also is a certain degree of risk connected with disclosing something important to somebody. The fear, the concern of being judged. Especially when we're talking about a relationship that, a conversation which kind of sets up what we in social work call a dual relationship. And what that simply means is having a interaction, a relationship that takes on an alternative purpose. So once again, you're the student's academic instructor. And when the student comes to you and shares with you a personal problem, it alters the focus of that relationship a little bit. So when somebody takes on the alteration of that relationship, there's concern, there's stress, there's a fear of judgment. So all of these things together can make help seeking very uncomfortable for people. And one of the things that happens is that we take on this risk of asking for help. And we do it because we have the expectation that we think the help is going to be given to us, that we're going to have some resolution of what our problem is. And in fact, that's going to be some resolution that we desire. When that expectation is not fulfilled, there can be a real sense of loss and even exhaustion. And so often what happens is people ask for help. And when they don't get the help that they need or expect. And I'm not saying that, their expectations are inappropriate. When they don't get the help they need or expect, that can completely shut down any further risk taking. And so that's one of the reasons why you want to keep this conversation brief and focused. You don't want the student to invest so much in this conversation he or she is having with you and asking for help that, and you obviously are going to be unable to give all of the assistance the student needs when the student is dealing with some challenge in his or her personal life. You don't want that student to expend so much energy and risk taking in that conversation and then not have that need fulfilled. So you want to keep the conversation brief and focused. And then, as I said, refer the student to somebody who can be more appropriately supportive of the student. Okay? Listen to the student's story with boundaries, as we've already talked about. Respect the risk of help seeking and the student's motivation for problem resolution. One of the things you can just plain say is, I really appreciate that you're coming to me and sharing this concern, this challenge that you have with me. Recognize I have limitations on how I can help you. And I want to make sure that you get connected to somebody who can help you in the most advantageous way. Thank you. I realize that this has been a difficult thing for you to come and even ask me for help, and that it's difficult to ask for help. And I applaud you. And I think that that is an amazingly responsible thing for you to have done. Okay. So those are just some things that you can say to respect the risk that they took in seeking help, and to also support them and congratulate them for addressing their problem. Demonstrate validation of the student's need. Indicate that you respect the fact that this really is a concern, the recognition and the validation of the need the student has. Don't in any way ignore that. Even acknowledge it verbally. Very important to have that kind of recognition of the risk the student has taken. So here are some, one of the things we do in social workers, we also talk about this two important skills in conversing with clients, with people when we're providing supportive services, called active listening and empathy. And active listening is exactly what it sounds like. It's listening that is engaged. And the engagement is demonstrated not only verbally, but also non-verbally through your non-verbal interactions. So make sure that once again, I mentioned a few minutes ago, you're maintaining appropriate eye contact with the student during the conversation. You're using body language that is open and accepting and non-judgmental, not closed off, and that you're expressing empathy. And what's empathy? Well, empathy is simply the capacity to emotionally engage with another person. Not to pity that person, but to work to understand and once again, accept without judgment what that person is dealing with. So here are some things that you can say that can demonstrate active listening and empathy. What I hear you saying is, that's a really good tool to make sure that you and the student have the same understanding with regard to what he or she is communicating to you and what's going on in his or her life and what his or her need is. What help do you need from me? I love that direct, pointed question. What help do you need from me? I like that, stating it that way rather than what can I do to help you? Okay. What help do you need from me really directly acknowledges the student's power and influence in this conversation, the student's directive in the conversation. So just a very upfront conversation to ask directly. And once again, remember to maintain boundaries. Sometimes the student may ask you for something that is never appropriate for you to do or provide, and make that statement. Don't hem-haw about that. set that boundary with respect. And then once again, tell the student that you want to do what you can to get him or her connected to somebody who can address the need the student has. And then once, I think I mentioned a few minutes ago, say something as direct as, what is your goal in telling me this? Why are you telling me? Why are you sharing this with me? I want to know so that I can be of assistance to you in that endeavor. Okay, so some more tips for a successful conversation. Keep the focus on the student addressing his or her needs, not on you being the problem solver or anybody else. This goes back to what we in social work call our empowerment perspective. People are best at solving their own problems with support that they need, with the tools and resources that they need. People are the experts in addressing their own problems, and it's really essential to make sure that there is the focus on the student's expertise with regard to knowing what his or her need is, knowing his or her situation, and also, to a great extent, knowing the appropriate solution. So once again, focus on what I called a few minutes ago, that strengths perspective. The student has some capacity to already address his or her problem. And one of the ways that we acknowledge that is by saying, you came to me and you're talking with me about this problem. You aren't simply sitting in your problem and letting the problem, further create dysfunction in your life. So look what you've already done to address your problem. Let's move forward with regard to that, or I want to support you in moving forward with regard to that. The students' past successful problem resolution and behaviors and trusted support people and cultural resources are easily accessible strengths for the current problem resolution. So I talked about this a few minutes ago. The tools, the resources, the opportunities that already exist within the students' environment are the ones that we want to rely on first and foremost. If those tools, those resources, those opportunities are inadequate, then the student gets connected to somebody else. And we can facilitate that connection, especially as I said a few minutes ago, by you perhaps referring the student to a resource on campus. You're not the problem fixer. Don't ever try to fix the problem for a student. You need to be very limited, if ever, saying something like, okay, I'll take care of that and get back to you. How in the world are we supporting that student's independent functioning? Unless, of course, it is something that is absolutely our responsibility. So, but even in that, you want to make sure that you engage the student as a partner in that. Very important. When we take on more responsibility than is appropriate, that's a wonderful way to increase stress in your life. So very important to reduce stress by making sure that you maintain boundaries about your responsibilities. Avoid toxic positivity. And this happens when we say something like, oh, everything's going to be fine. I've addressed problems like this, or students, I've encountered problems with students like this, students with problems like this in the past. Or once again, tragically, an instructor may say, I dealt with that and this is how I did it and everything's going to work out fine. You don't know that everything's going to work out fine. You don't have a crystal ball to tell the future. As well, you don't know what the students' processes and capacities are. So saying something like everything is going to be fine, when you are a recipient of a statement like that, what it oftentimes feels like is being dismissed. So just try to eliminate that phrase from your vocabulary, because you don't know that everything is going to be fine. And as I said, it can be very dismissive. Follow-up conversations that you have with the student should only focus on the student's course progress or limited resource referrals. And this includes conversations that might be initiated by the student as well as you. Remember, your role is to support the student's academic success. And any follow-up conversation should be in the context of, how are you doing in my course? Okay? Going back to respecting the student's privacy, you don't have any right to know how the student's doing in terms of grieving that loss in his or her life, or maintaining stability with housing, or the student's the health condition of your student's daughter. You don't have any right to know that. So don't initiate a conversation asking that. And I don't mean that I don't mean to imply that you should be rude in that. It just isn't your business to know. If you want to check in with the student, then ask in the context of his or her academic performance. Okay? And furthermore, if the student comes and tells you about what's going on with the health condition of his or her child, you can listen very briefly, but recognize that a lot of that information isn't yours to know. And thank the student for sharing that with you. And once again, focus back on the academic performance. Okay? Contact your dean to debrief anything that you might want to process or share with somebody else after these conversations, or in order to address the need that you might have or the need the student might have to resolve his or her problem further. That's the dean's responsibility, your academic dean, your division dean. To give us support when we're addressing students' needs. And indeed, it may be more appropriate for the student to have a conversation with the dean rather than you at all. So remember that your dean is there to do that. And it's appropriate for the dean to even assist you with addressing the stress that you might feel as a result of this conversation. So make sure that you remember that your dean is a resource and take advantage of that. Maintain appropriate professional roles and boundaries. Once again, I've said that so many times. Doing this necessitates that the student access assistance from relevant resources. So often, we are not the relevant resource for the student to address his or her problem. So you want to make sure that you help the student get linked to resources that can be successful. And I think Dr. Montana is going to talk more about what some of those on-campus resources are. Recognize that there are resources on the webpage, the main webpage. If you go to the Student Services tab, many of them are listed there. And I encourage you, if you want to know more about any of those resources on campus, make contact with the staff. There's nothing like a personal conversation with somebody to learn more deeply some information. So, if you tend to have students that you think could really benefit from a particular campus resource and you don't know as much as you know about that resource, reach out to the professional staff there so that you can get the information you need to inform the student about how that resource can help him or her, and to do what you need to do so the student can make a successful contact with those folks. Okay? So I think I'm done with my part, and I really appreciate your attention. Feel free to contact me in the future if you have any individual questions about what I presented to you. Once again, any additional concerns you have, please address them with your division dean. Thank you, and I wish you well. And please, we can all do what's important to reduce our stress, and I hope that my presentation to you will give you the tools to do that. Take care. Bye-bye.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Samuel Montano. I'm the coordinator for psychological services here at Fresno City. I'm going to be doing the section on at-risk students and resources. An at-risk student is a student who requires temporary or ongoing intervention in order to succeed academically. We do know at-risk students are less likely to transition successfully into adulthood and achieve economic self-sufficiency. There are four major factors or domains that I think really kind of conceptualize or make up the potential for risk. We see that there's family and community factors, personal factors, cultural factors, and school factors that can all kind of come together to create risk, or an at-risk student, if you will. I do want to specify, though, right here that for someone to be considered at risk, they don't need to have a risk factor from each section or each domain here. They could be doing quite fine in 3 of the 4, but have a lot of personal factors that put them at risk. So it's really important to kind of take that in mind when kind of sitting with a student and kind of understanding their story. So to kind of go into these, I just want to highlight some key things that could fit into these domains. So we have family and community risk factors. This can look like individuals coming from poverty, unemployment, parental low academic achievement, homelessness, a refugee background, family issues, and you can see listed here just some of the family issues that our students may be facing, and perhaps lack of transportation. And you can see this is not an exhaustive list, obviously. There are many other family and community risk factors that can play a part of this puzzle. Some personal risk factors that we see quite a bit: health issues. These could be physical and psychological, disability, criminal behavior or criminal record. Some of our students are coming out of prison, coming out of jail, on probation. That can put someone at higher risk for succeeding academically. That re-entry piece, substance abuse, pregnancy. A lot of our students, and I'm sure you see this, but so many of our students are taking care of other family members. So maybe taking care of a parent, tending to their siblings, taking on more of that mother or fatherly role at times. Perhaps learning difficulties, relational issues, and again, kind of employment issues. These can all play a role in risk. Some cultural risk factors. Minority populations can put people at more risk. Immigrant populations. We know sexual minority students and populations tend to struggle more with certain issues, whether that's mental health issues, there's service disparities, there's all sort of things that can put folks from various populations at higher risk. Veteran population, we have at all of our campuses in State Center a good amount of veterans. So being aware of people's status in regards to if they're veterans or not. Returning students. I think one thing that makes our campus really a strength, but can also put folks at risk perhaps, is we don't serve the traditional college, university population. We have students that span various different ages. And as you see, there's the next one, older adult populations, but span different ages, maybe returning to school in their 40s, 50s, 60s. And that adjustment piece can really put folks at risk. Systemic racism, discrimination, all of these things can play a significant role in risk. And I put a definition here for microaggressions, as a lot of people may not be familiar with this term, but I think it's important to be aware of, because microaggressions, although they might be micro, really do create a feeling for folks of this isn't a safe place. And if you don't feel safe in your campus, in your classroom, are you going to want to go? Are you going to want to try and do your best? You may not, right? So these microaggressions build up and can create a lot of problems for people succeeding. So please read the definition here. And these are things that we want to hold folks accountable for. You see a colleague, you see a friend, you see a student making a microaggressive type statement. Let's hold them accountable. Let's talk to them about that, because we want to create a campus and classroom environment that is inclusive. So some school-related risk factors: negative relationships with teachers, peers, admin, lack of student participation, the unsupported school environment. You can see how some of these things on the other slides can leak into these other domains too. So if there's like a limited subjects or options for students, that can create risk per se. Safety concerns, campus-specific crises. So a while back, we had a chemical spill, and that created a lot of anxiety, a strong feeling in a lot of students of lack of safety. And I know in our clinic, we saw a lot of crises come out of that. So taking in all of these things is important to do when trying to understand our students and how we can best serve them and understand what they're going through. Leading into more of the potential high-risk behaviors. These are things as professors you want to really keep an eye out for. Again, whether you're a professor or staff. So looking to see if a student's behavior is disrupting the class, right? That could look like maybe them not sitting still, getting up, walking around the class, emotional outbursts. We see that quite a bit at times, right? As you can see here, crying, laughing. Maybe someone's very tearful in class. You also want to look at things like, are they wearing appropriate clothing? Heavy coats in summer. Fresno, it gets hot, very hot. That can be a sign that something's off. So we want to keep all of this in mind when evaluating and connecting to our students. Hygiene is a big one as well. And again, I think this last bullet point should definitely be ringing some alarms for you when there's any sort of drastic or change in a student's behavior, something that's not typical of them, right? So maybe they're always coming to class, and then we see a few weeks where they're not showing up, or great grades, getting really high marks on their homework or tests, and then all of a sudden we see a big drop off. These are signs that as a professor, you see these, you should be kind of querying what's going on. You're setting up a meeting, reaching out to the student. What's happening? What's going on? And have that kind of back and forth communication. High-risk topics. I do realize that some, especially English courses, creative writing courses, counseling, psychology classes, you may assign a topic that will touch on these topics. So they may not come across as high risk in those respects, but they may. It's all in reading and kind of sometimes even reading between the lines here. So potential high-risk topics: students talking, writing, referencing suicide, self-harm, violence or wanting to hurt others, certain sexual assaults, maybe past or present, grief issues. They're talking a lot about isolation, rejection, being bullied, those sort of things, and economic instability, drug use. These can be potential high-risk topics. And if anything kind of rings an alarm for you or kind of piques your interest and elevates a level of concern for you, talk to them about it. Just set up a meeting, open door policy, open phone, open Zoom policy, I think would be great. We're going to get to how to chat with people a little bit later, but this high-risk topics that you might encounter. And again, not an exhaustive list, but for time and the real condensed nature of this presentation, here we go. So as you can probably tell, when you're having students who are exhibiting these high risk kind of behaviors, or they're reporting to you that these things they're struggling with in their personal lives, the burden can be heavy. And I know we've talked already about how you can manage stress, what you can do, but it can be really heavy. So I want to just emphasize this point of when you start feeling it, and even if you're not feeling it, right? You're a hard worker, you're grinding, you're working really hard. And then all of a sudden you feel, man, I'm super tired at the end of the day. I'm feeling a little bit more grouchy. I'm feeling a little more sad today. I want you to just kind of do a timeout with yourself. Take an inventory of your stress. Listen to your mind, listen to your body. What is it trying to tell you? It might be telling you that, man, I feel like reading that paper that Joe wrote really hit me a little bit in a concerning sort of way. And I know that he's been struggling in getting his assignments in, when at the beginning of the year, he was really on top of things. And I'm just feeling a little odd about that. Listen to yourself. That's a sign, right? That is a sign that maybe we should call Joe in. Maybe I should set up a meeting, send an email. But first, listen to yourself. What's your mind? What's your heart? What's your body trying to tell you? So managing stress, I'm not going to go into how to do these. If you want to, we're going to have events throughout the semester where you can come learn certain techniques on how to deal with stress. But if you've learned these already, you know them, practice them. Deep breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, taking a walk. Maybe after, a class, take a walk before your next one if you can, just to bring your stress level down just a bit. Just taking the pressure off just a little bit. Make sure you're eating lunch and drinking fluids. I know that sounds super basic, but these things are important. Getting good sleep if you can as well. Talk with a colleague for a few minutes. And again, like I said, you can come to additional trainings in the community education that we're going to be doing this upcoming semester. So stay tuned for that. Some resources for you. Specifically, department deans are going to be a real go-to for a lot of folks. So if you're concerned about your stress, if you're concerned about a student, department deans are always a good resource for you. Also, the EAP program, Halcyon, you can see it listed here, is a really good resource as well if you need to reach out for yourself to set up therapy appointments. They have services there for staff. We at Psych Services, we only treat students. That being said, if you need consultations, we can give consultation and some of that. If you're like, hey, I have a student who's going through this and you want some additional support from us, you can always call. Again, monthly stress reduction seminars, stay tuned. Wellness practices, self-care. If you're not doing these, I would really encourage you to just try. And you might want to start really small. So exercise, diet, sleep. If there are certain activities that really nurture you as a person, make room for those. That could be working out, could be listening to music, could be just taking that walk around campus. It's really when I teach self-care, because there's always do this, do that, right? The way that I teach it, and I think is the best way, because it takes the mechanicalness away from it, is what is self-care to you? What connects with who you are as a person? I may be saying, hey, man, hiking's great for me, but for you, oh man, I hate getting up into the mountains and hiking is not connecting with who I am. Maybe it's playing video games for an hour. So self-care, think about what it is to you. Some key campus resources, and again, this is definitely not exhaustive. This is where you can definitely talk to your department deans about getting resources to the greater campus. You can also, of course, explore the website in depth, but these are some of the key campus resources that you'll probably be referring students to. You might be reaching out for consultation and touching base with. So again, department deans, You have us at Psychological Services. We do have psych services at every campus at State Center. Our website is definitely the best place to go to refer students. That's where they'll request services. We have an online form. It's the quickest, the easiest way for them to do it. That's also where we're updating all the events that we're doing and our group therapy options and things like that. Health Services, their website is here listed. You'll click on that link. We work very closely with Health Services as well, doing outreach and various events. Our social work interns, really good resource for students who may be struggling with some of the basic living issues. So finding housing is a big one, medical, getting them connected there. Social work interns are really good. We do refer quite a bit to them. Our DSPS program, really, really great program to help students with accommodations and other sort of supportive services. They also do some testing there as well. And of course, Campus Police, great resource. You all should not be afraid to use them. I think a lot of faculty sometimes are. I hope you can break through some of that ambivalence or fear about using Campus Police with high risk concern that a student may bring up. If you think that they're actively suicidal or actively going to hurt someone, you want to call Campus Police. They're going to come out, they'll do an assessment. Our police are exceptionally good at dealing with our student body and doing it with a very compassionate, kind of warm approach. So Campus Police is a really good resource as well for you. So additional points that I want to make here in regards to psychological services. So we cannot provide services to students who have not consented. So sometimes we get emails, phone calls from faculty saying, hey, I need you to call Joe for me. We can't do that. Joe has to present to psych services or submit a request for service or call us directly. Students, again, just like I said here, must present themselves to us. That being said, you can walk them over to our department. That is fine. We like it when staff do that. So don't be afraid to do that. We're back on campus this upcoming semester, Monday, Wednesday, and Thursdays. So walking students over, fine. We're 8 to 5, Monday, Wednesday, Thursday on campus. Tuesday, Friday, we're going to be doing telehealth work. Again, like I said, when talking about Campus Police, if students are in immediate danger to self or others, you're going to want to bypass psychological services and you're going to want to call Campus Police so they can come out and do their risk assessment and get them the appropriate treatment they're going to need right there. And again, if you're concerned about a student but not sure what to do, you can always call us. We are really happy to take those phone calls and do consultation. So our phone lines are always open. Some key community resources and hotlines. This is the Gary Cannon Psychological Service Center. They do general psych services and testing. Marjorie Mason Center, really good resource for folks who are going through domestic violence or interpersonal violence concerns. Rape Crisis Center is a very good resource. And Exodus Recovery is really good for crisis stabilization. So, like I said, follow-up hosted training sessions. We have a couple dates here. There may be more to come. If you have any questions, any thoughts, feelings, reactions to this, feel free to let us know. In these follow-up presentations, this is where we can get more into the process of dealing with these things, how you're going to address it, the way you can talk, the questions you can ask. So I would really encourage people to show up to these. They'll be much more in-depth. For this, it was very condensed, just some of the key points. For more detailed training, please come to these. I hope you've enjoyed this and thank you so much.
If you're interested in more information related to this topic, please join us on one of the follow-up hands-on training sessions. Thank you.
Faculty-hosted training sessions will be Zoom events that allow you to collaboratively learn more about how to use the skills and resources described in this video. Registration details for these hosted workshops will be forwarded to you in the coming weeks. Please do feel free to email today's presenters with any questions or real-life scenarios that you would like to see addressed in these sessions. We would like to thank Drs. Bibioff and Montano and Professor Clift for sharing their experience and expertise with us today. Their dedication to you, their colleagues, and to the students that we serve has made this project possible. If you have any questions related to this session, please feel free to contact us. Thank you for your time and have a great semester.